What's up, everyone? I didn't know about economics for most of my time in high school. I knew some mathematics and some rhetoric, but economics was never a focus of mine. When YouTube recommended these videos to me, I used them to reinforce my belief in my ideas, but as time has gone on and I've learned a little more, I started disagreeing with them. Now I'm making these videos to offer my 2 cents on the issue, and while I cannot question the economic knowledge on these issues that Milton Friedman brings, the challenges to the ideas are important nonetheless, as it's always important to hear out both sides of an issue. I'll play through the video and respond as I can throughout. The first question goes on for about a minute and 30 seconds.
But most of what I've heard you talking about has been about the distribution of income rather than about the distribution of wealth.
Sure.
Now, you wouldn't argue, at least I hope you wouldn't, that the person in, let's say India is genetically inferior, say, to the person in America. It's rather through the purely arbitrary circumstance of birth that he's in a country with a less developed economy or in a family that doesn't have as large a share of the capital. And that's not something that he's to blame for.
Oh, I'm not blaming anybody.
Even if the free market system equitably works and everyone progresses an equal amount, that person who started out with a lesser share of the capital is still going to end up with a lesser share of the capital.
That's right.
And there's nothing in the free market system that's going to enable him to make up for what was a purely arbitrary deficit in the first place. And
What the questioner is asking here is actually a very important question in capitalism. Here's a question: what do you need to succeed today? It's a very broad question, but I'll point out a critical point that a lot of people tend to agree on. Education. Education is often a stepping stone towards finding higher paying work or acquiring the knowledge required to start and run a business successfully. It also heavily favors those with higher income. Today, sure, we have lots of financial aid, work study, scholarships, and loans, but this isn't money you just get. You have to qualify for grants, perform labor for work study, apply to many scholarships, and repay loans. This is extra work that the rich do not have to perform. There's a reason why good grades correlate strongly with income, and as a result, education is harder for the poor, so you see less poor people being educated. I could go on, but ultimately we all know the famous saying, the rich get richer, and the poor get poorer.
And given that the kind of people who become successful capitalists do not become that way by giving away their wealth voluntarily, isn't it necessary to forcibly redistribute wealth before you can begin to operate under a capitalist system?
No, it is not. The only way in which you can redistribute effectively the wealth is by destroying the incentives to have wealth.
So this will actually end up being the central argument against 100% inheritance tax rate, that it destroys the incentive to acquire wealth. I do disagree with this, so let's see how it's supported throughout this video.
And the question is, what is the way, what is the system which will offer those people who are so unlucky as to be born without good positions, what is the system which will offer them the greatest opportunity?
Well, one possible way of redistributing the wealth without affecting the incentives to earn as much income as possible is simply to have a 100% inheritance tax.
But
Since that won't
not
affect the incentives, it's only after the person's dead anyway.
I beg your pardon. I'm afraid, I don't know the family you come from. I don't, but as you grow up, you will discover that this is really a family society and not an individual society. We tend to talk about an individualist society, but it really isn't. It's a family society. And the greatest incentives of all, the incentives that have really driven people on, have largely been the incentives of family creation, of family, of pursuing, of establishing their families on a decent system. What is the effect of 100% inheritance tax? The percent of an 100% inheritance tax is to encourage people to dissipate their wealth in high living.
This is a very important part of the video. Remember, the claimed effect is that people will dissipate their wealth before they die.
What's the harm in that?
The harm in that is that where do you get the factories? Where do you get the machines? Where do you get the capital investment? Where do you get the incentive to improve technology? If what you're doing is to establish a society in which the incentive is for people who, if they by accident accumulate some wealth, to waste it in frivolous entertainment. You know, the thing is,
I actually have 2 points to these major points. I do find the accidental wealth a little bit funny, but the waste point is actually one of the more interesting economic things that I hear brought up a lot. So before he moves on, I want to point out an interesting thought. What do we mean by waste it? Remember, the harm claimed is that people will dissipate their wealth, but how do they do that? Well, they have to spend money. Milton Friedman states that it could be spent on frivolous entertainment, and though it is called frivolous, it is still a firm. So here's my question. What exactly happens when you spend money? Well, the businesses and individuals, entertainment or not, will spend the revenue on commodities, services, and other things that you need to run a business. That money isn't dead to the economy, it's still there. It's in the hands of operating businesses. These firms will have contracts with other firms to fill, customers to serve, and goods to purchase. A carpenter has to purchase tools, a grocery store food, and even the frivolous entertainment mentioned has to pay performers and the producers of their sets and possible costumes. So we have 2 situations. One in which the money flows throughout the economy and facilitates exchange among businesses and individuals, and one in which it gets passed on in inheritance. Important to note, inheritors don't exactly spend their money in this way. Most inheritors and total inheritance is by the wealthy, and they're more content to save and invest in mutual market funds than grow their wealth through commodities and stores. They still, of course, buy direct goods from stores, but a rich person spending $500 at Whole Foods does less to facilitate economic dynamism than does 10 people spending $200 on groceries. If, as Milton Friedman says, our goal is opportunity for the less fortunate, then inheritance tax seems to do a better job at that. Let's finish up the argument with one final argument from Friedman.
is the extent to which the market system has, in fact, encouraged people and enabled people to work hard and sacrifice in what I must confess I often regard as an irrational way for the benefit of their children. One of the most curious things to me in observation is that almost all people value the utility which their children will get from consumption higher than they value their own. Here are parents who have every reason to expect that their children will have a higher income than they ever had, and they scrimp and save in order to be able to leave something for their children. I think you are sort of like a bull in a china shop if you talk about the 100% inheritance tax having no incentive effects. It would destroy a continuing society. It would destroy a society.
Though I find myself agreeing with Milton Friedman on the progress of our society and our ability to work towards the future, I do need to respond to a few of the final points, especially where he mentions that the inheritance tax would destroy a continuous society. Parents go through work all throughout their life in order to bring about good conditions for their kids. Talk to any parents, talk to any poor parent who's put in the work to get their kid to where they gotta be. You'll talk to parents who've worked their way through education while raising multiple kids. You'll talk to single mothers, you'll talk to single fathers, and they'll all have their incredible stories about putting in more work than most of us really, in order to get their kids to where they gotta be. And you'll hear those stories from people who are alive today, because that's not really inheritance, that's just being a good parent. Hell, it's being a great parent, going above and beyond the call of duty. So, ultimately, I don't expect parents to stop wanting the best for their children because when they die they can't pass on the money they happened to have at the end. These parents already passed on all that they can. It's why poor parents who almost certainly never leave an inheritance to their kids, because they're poor, they don't have the money for it, still work hard every day, in many cases harder, in order to give their children better lives. I think if our ultimate solution is to bring about opportunity, equality, and to build a more meritocratic hierarchy, if we are to accept a hierarchy, that is, then I think an inheritance tax is absolutely necessary, as the questioner would say. At least that's my take on it. I think the final thing I wanted to say for this video is, I still have a kind of reverence for these videos, as much as I might disagree with them today, if only because it's sort of how I began, and I think I might do more of these in the future if I ever find the time. But that's all I got. Thanks for watching.